Well, Laura, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am awesome. Thank you for having me, Keith.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know communication is one of those things that so many of us have to do sometime. And I know when I was younger, the fear of communication was a lot of fun as I did a 7 minute sermon and wore my poor congregation out. But you're going to help us fix all that today. So we're looking forward to this. But I want to start out with
Thanks.
my favorite question I ask all my podcast guests. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I love that question. There was a teacher that I worked with when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Zimbabwe back in the 1990s. And every day when I would walk into our teacher room, he would say, Miss Laura, enjoy what? And I would have to say life, because that was really his mantra every day, enjoy life. And that's something like I still bring with me today. One of my favorite bits of advice I always remind my clients who are nervous about getting on the stage or doing the thing is simply to have fun and bring a sense of joy to it. Whatever you're doing that feels scary, bring some joy.
I love that. And joy does totally transform your atmosphere and your outlook on a situation. Whatever energy you bring into a situation, whether it's joy, anxiety, or hatred or whatever,
Mm,
that you communicate that to the room when you walk in. So I love that idea of bringing joy.
thank you. Yeah, me too.
I'm curious, if you think about your life, who were some people that served as a mentor for you on your journey?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my husband. We've just been married now going on 2 years, but uh, our story really he changed my life in so many ways, makes me a better speaker, a better person. And when we met, he was at first, I considered him my competition and kind of my enemy. It was March 3rd, 2020, and I had just boarded a plane to fly to Indonesia to give my first ever international keynote. I remember thinking this year is going to be the best. Like, what could go wrong? And, of course, a few weeks later, the borders shut down. I couldn't get back home. And right before I left, I was in one of my first international speech contests with Toastmasters. I'd won that contest. It was kind of the first level. You go through multiple, contests to get to like the big one, right? And I was supposed to be gone about 2 weeks, come back home, and then in person be in that next level of that contest. Well, even though everything shut down, the contest still went on, but it was going to be virtual. And so for me, it was in Indonesia in my little room that I was renting. And it was 3 in the morning was my contest time because of the time difference. So I had that already working against me, but I'd worked so hard on my speech and my story, and I knew it was really solid. And as the other contestants went, I was one of the last to go. I remember thinking, you know what? Like, I think I got it. Like, I really think I could win this next level. I was so excited. And then this guy comes on, this big Hawaiian dude. And I was like, who is this guy? Like, who is Kane Kamano? And I knew within like 3 to 5 seconds, I would say, that he was going to win. There's some people that are so charismatic, such good speakers, and they bring that energy, and I just knew, he's going to win. And he did. He took first, I took second, but he was on my radar. I was on his radar. And eventually, when I got back home, I was like, oh, keep your enemies close. And I don't know, maybe I could learn from this guy, I guess. And we started becoming friends. And we eventually started a podcast together about storytelling. And, long story short, eventually that love of ours, that love of storytelling, the love of speaking, brought us together. And yeah, he's become one of my top mentors in my life.
I love that. I love that story. That's such a neat story. You
Thanks.
talked about storytelling, and I think I just got went to a conference last year where he talked about the power of storytelling. I'm reading a book about
Mm.
storytelling. When you think about that, especially when you're trying to connect with an audience, what are some key elements that you try to get your people you're coaching to learn about telling compelling stories to engage your audience?
I love that question because here's the thing. Most people think that you have to be really creative or a great writer or already a great storyteller to use storytelling in your speeches or in your work, whatever it is that you're doing. And You don't. Like, it's very scientific. It really dates back to, I would say, the first model of storytelling is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And he showed us that if you follow this model, like setting out on a journey and, what are the gifts and the key message that you got on that journey? And then how can you like tie it all up in the end to give people that gift? You've already got a good story, because all stories are essentially the same. That are told well. Like, they contain some elements of contrast, of transformation, of a key message or learning point. Sometimes there's that inciting incident or a catalyst moment where the hero of the story changes and then learns something. So I use kind of like a very simple version of the hero's journey to help my clients know that if they just fill in the blanks really essentially in this simple story arc, they've got a concise, compact, like good story. And storytelling is really the only way that you can build a strong emotional connection with those that you're telling it to. And when you build an emotional connection with your audience, it goes from being like a good speaker to being really unforgettable because people will remember that story.
When you think about crafting a presentation for an audience, how do you begin to structure it so that you know it's going to be one that's going to knock it out of the park? Because as a pastor, you want to knock every single sermon out of the park. So how do you lay out this presentation so every single one you do is going to connect?
That's a
Or
great question.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Often, I think a mistake a lot of speakers make is that we start out thinking about ourselves and, how am I going to look? What am I going to say? How are people going to react to what I'm going to say? And that builds in a lot of fear too, because we're already kind of thinking about how we're going to be judged in some way, or, we're just too focused on ourselves. What I'd like to do is really start with that audience and ask yourself first, what do I want my audience to think, feel, and do? Start with them. What's a key message that's urgent right now? What's a story that goes along with that? What do you want them to think about? And then that feel part, do you want them to be motivated or inspired or laugh? And then the do is the call to action. What is there some strong message at the end too that you can say, okay, from this day forward, here's what I want you to think about. Go out and do this action. Give someone a random act of kindness, whatever it is that you're motivated by in that story. And then what happens is it's really beautiful. You start realizing that, oh, it's not about me at all. It's about the gift, the transformation, the beautiful, journey I'm going to lead this audience on. And suddenly nerves tend to disappear and you get more excited about what you're going to deliver. And then you're building it out from the structure from that place. It's going to be kind of baked in and it makes for just, a beautiful speech.
so I've been in sometimes presentations where sometimes the story is more powerful than the content. How do you
Mhm.
make sure that, because here's a good example. So if this person was talking about their cat or something, um, and the cat overwhelmed the rest of the content. How do you make sure
Mm.
your story or your illustration is not so big and so shocking that you lose the rest of your message in your presentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think especially when we want to tell our origin stories, like why we do what we do, or some kind of story about our own life, uh, you know, it can get too much about us or too much about the cat, and yes, overwhelm. And that's why it's really important to get in touch with the key message first. Like, okay, who is this audience? What challenge or problem do they all share that I can uniquely help them with and teach them about? And I would always make sure you have, usually at least like three main teaching points in there, and there can be, some little anecdotes too. So little kind of mini stories about those teaching points to help them learn them. But there definitely should be that element in there. So then you can kind of think about, okay, what story do I have that's going to be relatable that goes along with this teaching too? And make sure as you're structuring out your outline for your talk, that if you have the opening story, it really shouldn't be like, let's say you have a 40-minute talk. If it's 20 minutes, like that doesn't really leave you a lot of time to get that teaching to wrap up, to have questions, to have some interaction. Because one thing I really want people to understand is when you give a presentation, like don't even call it a presentation, call it a conversation, because that's essentially what it is. And when we have a conversation with people, we're pausing, we're asking questions, right? It shouldn't feel like you're just up there delivering this long monologue. Right. So if your story gets too big, that's what it kind of turns into. So usually with stories, I kind of go by maybe 5 to 7 minutes. You can just use time to start narrowing it down. Sometimes it's hard because we get really attached to the stories we love and we don't want to cut anything out. But again, that's where frameworks come in really well and handy too, because again, it's not about us.
I love that. I also tell speakers, make sure you land the plane. Don't trick people with
Mm,
with these approaches to the runway, and you obviously take off again. Which
yeah.
I've seen those kind of
Yeah.
presentations where you're
I
the
love
plane's
that.
coming in and like, oh
Yeah.
no, not yet.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Whoops. Nope. Back out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
back out
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So tell us about your book, The Public Speaking Horror Show: 7 Secrets to Kill It as a Speaker.
Yeah, this book, I think I've been writing really most of my life, I would say. But I had a sense of urgency after, I was quarantined in Indonesia, when I met my now husband virtually. And ended up being there for about 100, well, I know exactly 123 days, not that I was counting. and and when I came back, it's like I thought I was gonna die the whole time I was there because I had this massive hernia, but I didn't know what it was. And so when I got back home, I survived that surgery. And then I knew, this is what I most want to do right now is like get this book finished. This will be a big regret if I die and I haven't finished writing this. And it was my biggest childhood dream to be a writer. Because growing up with a stutter, that really was my outlet, that I felt comfortable with to express myself.
I love that. That's great. So when people pick up this book, what do you hope they learn from your story?
It's got a lot of storytelling definitely woven in it. I hope most of that they're inspired to then and have the tools to tell their own stories if they've been, they dream of being a speaker or they're already delivering a lot of speeches to be inspired to make it better. Don't get so stuck in your ways. I see a lot of great speakers who kind of deliver the same presentation over and over and over because they've gotten so comfortable with it. So I think there's always room to grow. There's always room to kind of stretch ourselves and try something new, have a little more fun, add some humor, all of those things. So I've given everyone a lot of tools because here's the thing, I hear a lot of people say, I'm just not a good speaker. And it's a skill. It's like learning an instrument. You're not going to be good right off the bat. You need to practice the tools, practice speaking, and eventually, like you are going to just get better. But there's always room for improvement too. And I learn something new every time I get up on a stage.
So people who are listening to you right now probably don't know about your background, that you did have an issue with stuttering. So how did you go from that issue that you had to now being a public speaking coach and successful speaker?
Yeah, there was a time in my life where I just couldn't live with the kind of anxiety I was feeling and shame. As a child, it was really difficult. It felt like a monster lived in my throat and would just eat my words when I tried to speak. I went through years of speech therapy and eventually I became a much more fluid speaker, but it's like that monster was still lurking, which really was my anxiety and my shame and embarrassment around it. So I got really good at hiding it from everyone, hiding my fear and my anxiety from everyone. But sometimes it would break through. And I was in a staff meeting. Being a teacher was like actually my first job back after having my son. And it was really important to me to have this job. And we went around the room introducing ourselves. But as it got closer to my turn, I didn't know it at that time, but I started having a full blown panic attack. And I was in my 40s. I couldn't say my name. And I knew that day that something really had to change. And soon after, I saw a sign. In my case, it was like a literal sign for a storytelling competition. And I knew I had to enter, even though my brain was like, no way, what are you doing? My gut was saying, like, do it. You have to do this. And that changed everything for me, running towards my fear, getting up on that stage. I won that competition, which built my confidence. But more than that, it was like everyone who came up to me afterwards and was inspired, it's motivated and now tell their story. And eventually it dawned on me that this is what I'm meant to do, because I've spent my whole life like learning how to overcome public speaking fear. I've been studying storytelling for forever. And it all of a sudden clicked to me that this will be my path to help others do that.
So, as a coach who's helping people learn to speak better, how do you help someone who's terrified about public speaking?
Well, one of my favorite tips to give, and it's kind of counterintuitive, so you're not going to find it out there, but most people say that you need to break out of your comfort zone in order to do the scary thing, right? That's kind of the first step, is to like get out of that spot. But what I say is stay in it when it comes to speaking, because when we get in touch with our comfort zones, like where we're feeling most comfortable, whether it's out in nature, on the beach, on our couch, and get in touch with that feeling, if you think about it, when you're in your comfort zone, words come to you very easily. You're not even thinking about it. You can be your authentic self. You don't have all your symptoms of nervousness. But the moment we tell ourselves we're doing a scary thing, right, especially right before we speak, and we're like, okay, I got to be brave and break down my comfort zone, our brain, it like triggers that nervous brain mode. And guess what? We forget what we're going to say. We tend to blank out then. All of our nervous symptoms come up. It's exactly what we don't want when we're speaking. So I help my clients get really in touch with, the words that they feel like the description of their comfort zone. Like for me, it's calm and peaceful. And then really set that intention to bring that feeling with them, stay in their comfort zone while they're speaking, just expand it out to do that scary thing. So for me, when I stopped telling myself, I'm just going to be brave, I'm going to be courageous and mega confident, and instead said, you know what? I'm just going to be peaceful. I'm going to pretend like I'm just out on a walk in nature talking to my best friend. It changed everything for me, and I became much less nervous.
I'm curious, does living in Hawaii influence your speaking style or just comfort? Because I mean, it must be really cool living on the Big Island. Does that also play into kind of your speaking genius?
To me, so I've lived here, it's going on 8 years, and I moved from upstate New York, and I definitely don't miss, like, scraping ice off windshields in the winter and that kind of thing. But to me, it's kind of funny that people think Hawaii, especially the Big Island, is very, like, chill, because, I mean, right now, for example, we have, like, a massive volcanic eruption at Kilauea. Like, there's lava shooting up, like, 1,000 feet in the
Oh
air
my.
that's creating toxic air. We get earthquakes a lot. We're on very, very isolated if something happened. Like the next landmass from the Big Island at the southernmost tip is Antarctica. So we're like, it's super isolated too. And it's not, so it's literally this island is still being created underneath our feet. But to me, I find that like very exciting. And I do think a lot about the power of creation, because I think we're all here to create something, to give it back then to the world and to help people in that way. So in that way, living here does inspire me, but not in the kind of chill sort of aloha vibe that I think people think, because I also, feel the power that Mother Nature has. And we're just, I mean, when I go and you can go see the kind of stand at the edge of the Kilauea crater and see that lava. It was like Christmas Eve, it started erupting again.
Oh my
To
goodness.
see that power makes you feel you're in awe, but you also feel just extremely insignificant and small. So it also just reminds me that, the world will keep going long after I'm gone, but I can, like, how do I want to make the most of my very small impact while I'm alive?
So my views of Hawaii 5 just are not accurate then.
Yeah. Well, Oahu's got its own vibe. I mean, definitely maybe that fits there. But Big Island, we're a little, yeah, we're a little like scrappy here. Yeah.
As you think about your coaching career, is there a client that stands out in your mind that you could think about the progress they made through your guidance as coaching?
Absolutely. This was about maybe 5 years ago now. I had a client, I know she won't mind me sharing her name. Her name was Arliss, and she had never spoken before. But, Maya Angelou has this quote that there's no greater agony than an untold story within you. And that's how I feel about Arliss. Like she had this really powerful story within her. She'd been diagnosed when she was young with like a fatal disease, but she's still with us, and she had kind of, it just really changed who she was as a person, how she lives her life, and she knew that her story would really help and inspire others, but she was scared to tell it. And when we started working together, it just so happened there was this international women's conference coming up. I'm like, what if I just get you into this conference to speak and you just do it and you tell that story and I work with you? And she was terrified, but she said yes. I got her in to speak at the conference. And after she had given her presentation, I wasn't there, but she called me, picked up the phone. Hey, Arliss, how'd it go? She was crying. So I was like, oh, no. And then she said the words I'll never forget. She said, Laura, you just changed my life. And she was really crying tears of joy. It was so she knew in that moment her life really did change. And guess what? It did. Like, not only from that conference, she was voted best presentation of the entire conference. And there were at least like 30 other speakers that had done it a lot. And but she won that kind of coveted award for the conference. She went on to create her own podcast. She has her own TV show right now. She's considered a speaker. She speaks all over the place. Her business really took off. She went from being more kind of like an admin helper assistant to a really sought after, like, high charging, by the hour business coach. So she's really, living this completely different life. And she's the one, like, I don't date it back to give myself credit. It was really her. But she's always the first to say that was that moment when everything changed.
As you If you're someone who has a story and you want to be able to figure out how to tell it, are there some keys you would say, here's how you develop your story and hone it down so that your story is compelling and powerful?
Yeah, absolutely. And, most people think that storytelling is very creative and that you have to be a good writer, already a good speaker, storyteller, but really it's very scientific. So, what I recommend is really following like a very simple framework, even if you boil it down to just a story arc where I think we used a plane metaphor earlier, but it's like to me, the most important part of, let's say, flying is like the takeoff and the landing, right? Those are like the parts I want the pilot to get really right. And I think for a speaker too, a really strong opening hook is so important to think about. And then landing it strong too. Now, the middle part, you can kind of finesse and work out. You might forget something and backtrack and no one's going to even know. But I think starting with that hook, and what I mean by that is also not doing what everyone expects, which usually is introducing yourself or thanking everyone. You're wasting those first really crucial seconds where you can, draw your audience in and lure them in with your message. So some hooks I really love are asking a question or sharing a quote or a statistic that's going to kind of blow everyone's mind, or launching right in with a powerful story. Right. And then a mistake I see a lot of speakers make at the end is if they end with questions and just end there and then they're like, that's all I got. You're just kind of throwing it away. You don't have that strong, powerful landing, right? So of course it's great to have questions sometimes if you have time, but you're in charge of the narrative, and the person that's the speaker holding the microphone, they wield a lot of power. So you can say, I've got time for one or maybe two questions, and then I have, one final thing I want to share with you, right? So you bring it back to you so that, you can leave them with that strong message that you want them to just walk away with.
Love that. You have any
Thanks.
projects you're working on for the future besides the book you just got come out?
Yes, I am really excited about my own podcast. It's called the Public Speaking Horror Show podcast. And what I'm doing is interviewing speakers that have, some stories where things have gone sideways. Because I hear everyone tells their like best stories, and how they overcame, something, and then they're, it's really happy ending. But I want to get to some of those horror stories of when things, things just went really bad. And there is a lesson out of it, but I love sharing those darker stories. So that is going to launch in June. And it's going to be up on YouTube. You can find my YouTube page now. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I remember my horror story, my very first sermon. It was terrible. It was 7 minutes long,
Mm.
and it was actually a 20-minute sermon, but I was so nervous I could not
Oh.
let go of the pulpit, and I had to try to memorize it. So I tried to read through before I breathed. So I did the entire thing in 7 minutes without breathing. And this
Wow.
little old lady in the congregation said to me, "Pastor, I think you have a lot of good stuff to say, but you said it so fast, I'm literally exhausted."
See, okay, I think I have 4 more guests I can book for this first season, so I might be reaching out to you for that story. That sounds so good.
It was
Yeah.
hilarious. It was terrible.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, that's our instinct, right? Survival mode, because we just wanna get through to the end, and
Right.
so I do see a lot of, like, newer speakers, they rush it. There's no pausing, there's barely a breath, they're just and at the end, they're probably so proud of themselves, like, "I did it, like, I got through it," So but yeah.
And then reality hits from somebody in the audience just being just polite to say that was not good.
Yeah, like, they didn't die, so that's good, but yeah, there comes a time when eventually you realize it's not about you surviving, it's really about what am I giving this audience, what experience am I giving them, right? So you stressed out that little old lady, so
One thing I've noticed about speaking too, if you have a gift, whatever that gift may be, whether it's speaking or writing, I always tell people it's going to be the thing you struggle with the most,
Mm,
the thing you're most gifted at. So if it's public speaking, there'll be anxiety around every single presentation. But you might get up on stage and all of a sudden all that anxiety goes away. But before you get up there, you could be the most. I told my family I was horrible on Saturday night because when I was preaching on Sunday, I was nervous and I was grumpy. But on Sunday, when I got in the pulpit, it was fine. But before
mm.
that, everything was miserable.
Yeah. I mean, the sense of dread is
Yeah.
very potent, with speaking. And it's so much sometimes, leading up to it, we can get ourselves really, really worked up. I do stand up comedy occasionally too. And to me, like I am probably always going to feel like I'm going to throw up before I do stand up comedy because it's just so scary to me to get up on that particular stage. But that's one of the reasons I love to do it. But, something that really helps though is trying to take that sense of dread and really ask yourself, like, what is the worst that can happen? And that is, if you kind of get in touch with that and then you realize how unrealistic it really is, right? And then also taking as much of those nerves and anxiety and just rebrand it, repurpose it as excitement, instead of, oh, I've got to do this darn speech. I got to get up on the pulpit. I got to do that. Instead, you get to, you know what? I get to get up and I get to make people laugh. I get to deliver this powerful story, and just kind of trick yourself. I can't wait. I can't wait to do it. Right. And then trust that when you're there, you're going to have the strength. Like you are going to have the strength. It's all going to click together if you prepare. Like I don't advise to ever wing it, put in the preparation because it's such a gift
Right.
to yourself. It doesn't mean memorize, but it's more like get it to the point where it's internalized. Like, this visually, where it's all going. You can get back to something if you forget it, and then you'll thank yourself. You will thank your future self will thank you for doing that work.
I always tell my wife, she said, "How'd it go?" I'm like, "Well, no one threw food." So,
Yeah. See? Awesome. Yeah.
so I'm curious, Laura, what do you want your legacy to be?
Mm, for me, it's that I've changed people's lives in a meaningful way that inspired them to share their story, to give speeches that really left an impact. So they're leaving a legacy too. that like I want to help people get in touch with, yeah, what they want their legacy to be. And, whether it's, writing their book or, delivering these powerful speeches. I would love that if people remember that I played a really small part in something positive like that in their life.
That's great. As we wrap up our phenomenal conversation, what key takeaways you want to leave with the audience from our conversation today?
I want everyone to know that what you fear will set you free. Like whatever it is you're probably most scared of, if you really befriend it, get in touch with it, there's so much liberation there. And sometimes the things that we fear most, it's like pointing us in this direction in our lives of what maybe we need to really work on, right? Um, I have so many people that they don't want to speak because they fear judgment, right? So if you're fearing judgment from others, that means that you need to get in touch with what it is about yourself that you're scared of showing everyone else, or, that story like to tell everyone else. So there's so much strength in that vulnerability. And also, no one is judging you, right? I mean, it sounds kind of harsh, but no one's thinking about you, right? We're all like in our own, like that awkward thing you said 3 years ago that you're still thinking about. No one's thinking about that but you and the entire world. So just let that go and, be brave and do the scary thing.
I love it. Where can listeners find your book, The Public Speaking Horror Show, Seven Secrets to Kill It as a Speaker, and connect with you on social media?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It is up on Amazon. You'll find it really easily there, and you can, have it on Kindle, print, and I recorded it on Audible. So that was just a couple months ago. I finished recording it. I was really excited about that. And if you follow my author page there, you'll see my new book that's coming out sometime this spring. It's a book for women in their 50s, an empowerment book for them. So if that's you, then you can check that out as well. On Instagram, I'm Laura in Wonderland. And if you go to my website, which is thespeechslayer.com, my business is Speech Slayer, then you'll find all of my things and places to follow me.
Laura, thanks so much for taking the time and
Welcome.
inspiring people to tell their story, because I think everybody has a story to tell. And it's oftentimes a very powerful story. And if we can better relate to those and get those stories out, I think we're all much better blessed as people and know other people have a inspiring story as well.
Thank you for saying that. It's so true. Storytelling builds empathy and compassion and tolerance, which is so needed in our world. And so I really encourage everyone to do that. Thank you, Keith, so much for having me today. It's been a joy to have this conversation.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.